Why is our authentication status ignored when we try to fetch data? Well, just because we know that we are authenticated and that we have the token somewhere in our user object, Firebase doesn't know that. We're not attaching it to that outgoing request, and therefore Firebase has no chance of understanding that we have a valid token. We need to add that token to the outgoing request to let Firebase know about that. And for that, we need to manipulate our outgoing HTTP requests that are related to data storing and fetching. Hence, we need to look into the data storage service where we have fetch recipes and store recipes. And these requests here now need to be edited such that we do attach our token to them. The token we are storing in the user object in the auth service. For that, let's inject that auth service here into the data storage service. Of course, make sure you add the import path. And now we need to get access to the user in both store recipes and fetch recipes because we need to get the token there. Now we could set up a subscription to the user, but I don't care about every change to the user. Instead, when we try to store or fetch recipes, I just want to get the token of the currently authenticated user. I don't want to have an ongoing subscription. Hence, in the auth service, we now should also store the token or the user in a way that we can access it through different means. So not through a subject, which is great for reactively updating the user interface, but that we also have a way of on-demand fetching of the user data. Now, there are a couple of different ways of achieving that. Since we're only interested in the token, we could just store the token here in a variable, which is null initially and which will hold a string eventually, where we set the token whenever we also emit a new subject. That would be possible and wouldn't be wrong. But we can actually also use a different type of subject here. This subject is a subject to which we can subscribe and will get an information whenever new data is emitted. Now, actually, there is a different type of subject RxJS offers, which is called behavior subject. Now, this is also imported from RxJS, and generally it behaves just like the other subject, which means we can call next to emit a value and we can subscribe to it to be informed about new values. The difference is that behavior subject also gives subscribers immediate access to the previously emitted value, even if they haven't subscribed at the point of time that value was emitted. That means we can get access to the currently active user, even if we only subscribe after that user has been emitted. So this means when we fetch data and we need that token at this point of time, even if the user logged in before that point of time, which will have been the case, we get access to that latest user. Now, therefore, behavior subject also needs to be initialized with a starting value, which in my case will be null here. It has to be a user object, and null is a valid replacement because I don't want to start off with a user. Now, we don't need to change anything in the auth service. We still emit our user as we do before with the next function. But in our data storage service, now we can reach out to the auth service user, get the currently active user, and be done with that. And that's just what I want to do here, for example, when we fetch recipes. So here, we reach out to the auth service, there to the user, and now the thing just is, I don't want to set up an ongoing subscription, and still I need to subscribe to get that user. So to make sure I only get the user once, and thereafter I'm done, of course we could manually immediately call unsubscribe thereafter, or you use pipe, and then a special operator RxJS gives you, and that would be the take operator. Take is also imported from RxJS operator, and take is called as a function, and you simply pass a number to it. And I pass 1 here, and what this tells RxJS is that I only want to take one value from that observable, and thereafter it should automatically unsubscribe. So this manages the subscription for me, gives me the latest user, and unsubscribes. And I'm not getting future users because I just want to get them on demand when fetch recipes is called. So whenever this code executes. I don't want to set up an ongoing subscription, which gives me users at a point of time I don't need them anymore. So thereafter here in subscribe, I get my user object, but only once. And we don't need to manually unsubscribe. In there, we can then use this HTTP request observable and set it up in there and attach our token, which we get out of the user. The problem just is, here we're in subscribe of an observable, and here we create yet another observable. And in the end, I want to return this observable here, but returning from inside subscribe does not work. We have to return on the top level of this method. The solution is that we pipe these two observables, the user observable and the HTTP observable, together into one big observable. And now this is getting a bit more advanced here related to RxJS, but still pretty easy to understand in the end. You simply add another operator here to pipe for the user observable. And there we can use exhaust map. Exhaust map is also imported from RxJS operators, and whilst the name might look strange, it does something very simple. It waits for the first observable, for the user observable, to complete, which will happen after we took the latest user. Thereafter, it gives us that user, so in exhaust map we pass in a function. There we get the data from that previous observable, and now we return a new observable in there, which will then replace our previous observable in that entire observable chain. So we start off with a user observable, and once we're done with that, this will be replaced in that observable chain with the inner observable we return inside of that function we pass to exhaust map. So in there, I will return this HTTP request where I get my recipes. This is now returned inside of exhaust map, and therefore this entire observable chain now switches to this HTTP observable. Now regarding map and tab, which we used before, we can cut that. And since we already are in a pipe method call here, and we added take and exhaust map, we simply add the other two operators as next steps after the exhaust map. And then we return this overall observable. This means that we can still subscribe to that observable returned by fetch recipes, and in the end it will be an HTTP observable because we switch it here. We then also apply all the other operations we did, and to the outside world nothing will change. But inside we utilize this user observable, got the user out of it one time only, unsubscribed to that observable, and then automatically replaced it with a new observable here. Now, of course, this alone doesn't do everything. We got the user now. Now we can extract the token. And how do we add the token now to this request? Well, for Firebase and the real-time database REST API, which we're targeting here, we add a token as a query parameter in the URL. For other APIs, you add it as a header in the request. For the Firebase real-time database API, you add it as a token, as a query parameter. That's just how it is. You can read that in the official Firebase docs. Now, to add a query parameter, we got two options. We can do it manually by setting a question mark, and then the parameter name has to be auth. That is what you can learn in the Firebase docs. And you set it equal to plus user token. Or, to not set it manually like this, you add a second argument to the get method, which is an object where you can set the params, as you learned in the HTTP client module. And there you set the new HTTP params object here, where you call set, and then you set auth equal to user.token, like that. And HTTP params needs to be imported from @angular/common/HTTP. Now, what if that token would for some reason be undefined? If that would happen, we wouldn't have a big problem. Our request would just fail because we send an invalid token to the backend then. But we will later also add code to automatically log the user out when the token expired, so we shouldn't even get into such a situation. So let's save that. Let's go back to authenticate and log in here. And let's now try and fetch data. And that looks quite good. Here's our data, and if we inspect the network tab, and I have a look at this request, this it is, here under headers, let me increase this a little bit in size. Here under headers, you see that this auth parameter was added and that this is our token, and it seems to work since we fetched all the recipes. So that is working, which of course is great.